Hi everybody. Today I want to talk about the importance of advocating for your loved one when you've taken them to the hospital and they have mental illness and they may not be able to advocate for themselves. The problem is the HIPAA laws are enacted, and if you do not have a signature for them, they're really not going to tell you much. But there still are ways around it so that you can get the information across to the hospital that they need, and then your loved one doesn't get put in the wrong unit or left without medication. You can still advocate for them. It's kind of hard, but you can. So my recent experience of taking my son Corey to the hospital, he has schizoaffective disorder, which is basically schizophrenia and a mood disorder. So it's kind of like schizophrenia with bipolar characteristics as well. And I take him into the emergency room. He was on medication, but he was having disorganized thoughts. And as soon as your loved one says something about harming themselves or wanting to harm others, they're going to 1013 them. So you go into the hospital voluntarily, and then you get involuntarily hospitalized. And what that means is they now have control of you, and they decide when they release you, not you. You can't just walk out. So I take my son to the emergency room, and I'm able to let them know what he has, what kind of medications he's on, what are the dosages, and he was able this time to be able to tell them what he needed also. But they involuntarily, they 1013'd him, hospitalized him. In Florida, that's a Baker Act, so some of you may be familiar with the Baker Act. So at this point, they've got control of him. They do find a room. They take him back to the psych part of a regular hospital where they have basically 4 walls, a bed, and a TV. And at this point, if you are not signed into be able to have access to their medical records via HIPAA, then they're not going to tell you anything. You can call and call and call, but they're not going to tell you where they're sending them or where they are. So at that point, he sat there for a day and a half until there was a bed found at a psychiatric hospital. And it's not just one psychiatric hospital that is close to your house. They're going to find a bed that's open, and they can kind of send them pretty much anywhere. It could be very far away from your house. So he sat in the emergency room for a day and a half, and they didn't give him his medication. He wasn't able to sleep, he wasn't able to eat, and then when they transported him out to a place that was over an hour away, they put him in the acute unit, which is a low functioning pod, which is a lot of people that are delusional or psychotic. And I didn't take him into the hospital that way, so he should not have been placed in that pod. I end up getting a call from him once he gets to the hospital, and basically he's telling me that they're allowing the women in the pod to, get in the guys' faces, hit them in the face, punch them in the face, and the nurses are not doing anything about it. So I call the hospital, and they tell me, well, you don't have a patient number, so we can't tell you anything. And we really don't know where he is. I said, well, I got a call from your hospital, so I do know he's here. And when I talked to him, they would not give him a patient number. They won't tell him his patient number. They didn't give him a patient number. And they really didn't want to give me much help. So I called back and I said, this is the medicine that he needs. He's been off the medicine. He hasn't slept. He hasn't eaten. I didn't turn him over to you psychotic or really delusional, just disorganized thoughts. So he's going backwards in progress. He needs to be moved to a different unit. On top of the fact that I'm getting phone calls that the nurses are allowing him to get hit and beat up. They eventually decide that they will put me through to the pod that he's on. And the nurse picks up and I hear all this yelling and screaming and stop, 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 and the phone goes down. So I call back, and I just had the inclination that that went down because something was happening with my son. And I told the receptionist that. Now, during the time I'm talking to the receptionist, my son is in a fight with this 300-pound female, and he weighs about 140 pounds, and they're allowing her to beat him up. So he kept putting his hands up and telling them what was going on. They weren't listening, so they eventually got in a fight, and that was the cause for them moving him to another pod. At the same time, I'd be making phone calls saying, I didn't turn him over to you this way, so I will hold you and this hospital accountable for making him delusional or psychotic because you haven't let him sleep, eat, you've not given him medicine, and I've been following behind you all the way, and he's also been telling you what he needed. So about a half hour later, I get a phone call from my son, and he says, Mom, for some reason they moved me out of that pod. I'm now in the progressive unit. They gave me my medicine, and I'm starting to feel a little bit better. Maybe I can sleep tonight. And he said to me, which is heartbreaking, sometimes you just have to go through hell to get better. And I said, no, you don't. These hospitals should not be leaving our loved ones without medication, without sleep, and knowing they can't eat. If I had not made these phone calls, even though the HIPAA paperwork wasn't signed, telling them I was going to hold them accountable for any injuries or anything that happened to my son, he would not have been moved. He would still be in the acute unit, the low functioning unit, and he maybe would still even be there today. Now, as a result of this, I was able to leave a message for a social worker that called me, and I was able to talk to her and tell her what medication he was on, what medication had been recently added, which was causing the problem, and the fact that he hadn't slept or eaten since I'd admitted him to the emergency room. Now at this point, they started to work with him. They started to talk to him. He started to be able to sleep. He had better roommates that weren't causing chaos, so he could actually sleep. And they started to work with his diet. He had to start back eating very slowly, so they got him a nutritionist. And that took probably, I would say, about 4 days of them monitoring him and getting him back on meds, readjusting meds, getting his sleep and eating, and then he was finally released. But if I, as his mother, had not intervened, he would probably still be at that hospital today. So people, advocate for your loved ones, because they don't need to go through hell and get beat up to get better. Have a great day.